Okay, welcome to our session on migrating to flow. And thank you again to our sponsors from Or2, PDF Butler, Media Monks, and also GridMate. And a special thanks to the Trailblazer community as well. Take a look in the chat in the left-hand side, and there's a link to the raffle, which we will post at the end. Okay, so for those that don't know me, seems like I've been around in the IT industry forever, and about 7 years ago started as an accidental Salesforce admin. And pretty quickly learnt that I needed to get some certification and get some real skills to be able to further my career, which has actually worked out pretty well. So I work full-time as a Salesforce improvement specialist for a company based in Queensland, in Brisbane. And I work remotely. I'm only there in Brisbane about 10% of the time. The rest of the time I work from home, which is rather pleasant. It means I don't have to live in a big city and I don't have to travel to work every day. Work is about 3 steps from my bedroom. Also developed some training materials for courses that I deliver at Certified CRM, and I also deliver some Salesforce training for the University of Canberra. Now, I'm very much a flow fanatic, but realise that I'll never be an expert because there's always new releases coming out and there's always something new that we can learn. Okay, so why do we need to migrate to flow? There's 3 key drivers. Number 1 being that workflows and process builders being retired. Number 2 is around functionality, and that the functionality of flow is now significantly better than what you could do with workflows and what you could do with process builder. And performance is vastly superior as well. And in fact, for record triggered flows, there's only about a 5% penalty over Apex triggers. So performance is great, functionality is great, and these other 2 older generation products are being retired. So both workflow rules and process builders are scheduled to be retirement. So the first step is in winter 23. So that's our next release coming up in September, October. Depends on where your org is located, but around that September, October timeframe with winter 23 is that when you go into workflow and you want to create a new workflow rule, it will say, you can't do that anymore. They've been retired. Now, so that's for workflow rules. You can still edit them. Okay, so if you've got an existing one that still works, you can edit it. That's not a problem. So you can add steps to it, add actions to it, remove actions from it. You just can't create a brand new one from scratch. So that's the message that you'll get, the top one, when you try to create a workflow rule. So it says, workflow rules aren't enabled, but you can use Flow Builder. So go build it in Flow. Also in Process Builder, you'll get a message, to remind you that their end date's coming soon too, and you should really start to look at Flow. So the switch off date for Process Builder, I'm not sure whether they've announced a final one where they're going to turn that off, but it's not far behind Process Builder, maybe the next release after winter, which would be spring 23, maybe in January. Okay, so workflow rules, you can't create new ones, but you can still edit the existing ones. Okay, so if there's an existing one, still works, still does what you want, it'll keep running. And it'll probably keep running for years to come. Okay, so there is no sunset plan at the moment when they're going to turn off your existing workflow rules completely. There has been no announcement around that I'm aware of. Okay, so in terms of functionality, not only does Flow do things better, it does stuff that you just can't do with Process Builder and Workflows. For example, Process Builder and Workflows are all about those magical things that happen in the background, but there is no user input. You can't write a process builder that pops up something on the screen to the user and says, hey, fill in this, make a selection here, select the records that you want, select some buttons or actions or whatever. You can't do that. You can't do that with Process Builder, and you can't do that with Workflows. So screen flows, which is a form of flow, are designed for those user inputs. So if you need to build a wizard to be able to, select, do like a survey, you could build a survey with that. Or maybe you've got a troubleshooting tool that you want to build that depends on what answer you are, what reply you give to question number one. It takes you down a different branch for question number two. Those sorts of things you can build with screen flows very successfully. You can't do tests. You can't create tests within Process Builder and Workflows to make sure that you don't break something. Now, in winter 23, they move into general availability, that GA, that means generally availability. It's available to everyone. So you'll be able to create tests for record triggered flows. And that means you'll be able to have a lot more confidence that what you've created is not going to break something else. You can also set the order of execution with record triggered flows. So if you have a number of flows operating, record triggered flows, let's say on the opportunity object, you can now set the order in which they execute. We'll talk some more about why that's important later. Flow's got a good debugger capability. So you get an email when something breaks. If you click on the link in that email, it would actually take you straight into the flow and show you where your flow failed. You can also run your flow when you're developing it in debug mode, and you can step through and see what actions occurred and what the values of variables are as you go. You can, from within Flow, call Apex actions as well. So where you've got some heavy lifting that you need to do, you can call Apex to do that for you. You can also use flows for next best action and in Flow Orchestrator. And there's also now some Slack integration as well. So the bottom line is, in terms of Salesforce's software development side of things, there is no work being done on Process Builder or Workflow. That's stopped. All the effort is going into Flow. So all of these new things, the test for record triggered flows, setting the order of execution, debugging, actions, NASPEC action, orchestrator, Slack integration, and whatever comes next is all the development work that is happening in Flow. If we look at performance, Process Builder has traditionally had pretty poor performance. Workflows, not actually too bad. While they are pretty quick, they are also very, very simple. Based on a field value in the current record, do something, update the record, send an external message, create a task. That's about all you can do with a workflow. Not a great deal. The performance, as I said earlier, of record triggered flows has been benchmarked to be only about 5% penalty on Apex triggers. So about 5% slower than getting your developers to build an Apex trigger. And of course, If you're building a flow, your admin can do that. You don't need a developer, and you don't need to write Apex test classes either. So while the workflows are fast, they're pretty resource hungry, and there's a good explanation, and there's more detail from Salesforce architects that talk about workflow rules having a completely different runtime system than flow. So the metadata is different, the runtime's different, and they also cause a recursive save. Okay, so they always do a save after the record is saved, an additional save. And any of the improvements that they're making to flow, so performance, debugging, management, all that sort of stuff, are never ever going to benefit workflow rules, okay? Because there's just no more work. They're retired, basically, in terms of performance, in terms of development. Salesforce architects in that same article went on to talk about some of the reasons for poor performance of Process Builder. While it does run on top of the flow runtime, there's quite a bit of difference between the user sort of facing design model and flow's metadata model, which means that from Process Builder, it becomes, as they call it, a mangled, less performant, and often incomprehensible flow definition. So it's a mangled thing that doesn't really work very fast and never will. Okay, I've got a question there. Can we get the slide deck for this session? Yes, all of the slides or videos of all the slides will be available at the end of the session. Not sure exactly when, but I guess you go back to Pakistan Dreaming website and find them there somewhere. Okay, so, all right, so we understand that we've got to do it. We've got to do it for performance reasons, for functionality reasons, and because these things are being retired. So how do we go about it? 3 main steps, and we'll go through each of these. Create an inventory. So it doesn't matter how you do it, doesn't matter what tools you use, whether you use a spreadsheet or you write it on the back of a scrap of paper, it doesn't really matter, but create an inventory of all of the automations that you've got. So include the object that they impact. So is it accounts, contacts, opportunities? Who actually owns it? Because you might need to talk to them. What's the priority of it? How important is it? How frequently do these people use it? If it's a high priority thing, but they only use it once a month, well, it's a bit further down the line than something maybe is a medium priority, but is used 10 times every day. Including your inventory, what type of automation? Is it a workflow or is it a process builder? When did you actually last modify it? That would be interesting. I bet there's a lot of workflows there that haven't been modified for years. And see if you can put together just a brief description of what it actually does. You know, just a sentence of what it does would be helpful. Okay, so let's say we've got our inventory. Now we need to go through and prioritize that. And you can prioritize it however best suits your business. It might be that you decide you're going to go object by object. So you're going to go through, you're going to do accounts first, and then you're going to do contacts, then you're going to do opportunities, then you're going to do cases, whatever it is, doesn't matter. So that's one way that you can do it. Another way that you might like to do it is by business function. So maybe you'll do all of the automations that your salespeople use, or maybe the ones that your support or your finance people use. So that's another way that you could prioritize it. And then you could look at the impact. So the impact is pretty much the priority and the frequency. So do you pick off some quick wins first, or do you tackle the high impact ones first? This is probably going to depend on the skill of your team. If you're very confident in your flow skills, then maybe you will pick off those high impact ones and get those done first. If you're not sure, or you want to just get some quick wins under your belt, maybe you'll pick off a couple of low impact ones that, if you get it wrong, it's not going to break the company. And by impact, I mean either, how many times it gets used every day, so the frequency, or the amount of effort that you're actually going to save. Okay, so if you speed up this automation, how much time or how much effort are you likely to save? So once you've done that, then we can start and prioritize. So you can identify and get rid of those ones that are no longer used. And I bet everybody's got some workflows in their organization that they've either got no idea what they do, or they're disabled and not being used anyway, or they just simply don't do anything useful anymore. So that's a good way of cleaning your house a bit, get rid of some of those. The other thing that we try to do is, where possible, is we try to combine some existing automations into one flow. So if we've got updates that occur when an opportunity is saved, for example, then if there are 3 or 4 different workflows running, maybe we can combine those all into one flow and put some criteria there as to when different parts of it get executed. If, however, we're stuck with, we really can't separate them, or we really can't combine them, then we can use the Flow Trigger Explorer to set the execution order. Okay, so if you end up, you're still, because of whatever complex reason, you're still going to have 4 or 5 record triggered flows on opportunity, that may well be fine, but use the Trigger Flow Explorer, and there's a picture of it on the right there, and you can set the priority in which they run in. Okay, so once you've done all that planning, now you're ready to implement the changes. So training your team, developing some standards, including some test strategies. How are you going to test them to make sure that they work properly? And what sort of tools are you going to need? So in terms of training your team, there's heaps of great resources available, including Trailhead. There's some good stuff there on Flow. There's my own course at Certified CRM. So I've got a Learning Salesforce Flow there, very affordable course. Andy's got some at Udemy and a few others. Salesforce Ben's got some good Flow courses, and there's some great material on YouTube. So there's no shortage of training material to get your team up to speed with Flow. And look, all of them are pretty good and pretty affordable, and some of them are free. So there's really no excuse to say, oh, hang on, this thing's happening and I'm not ready. Well, what have you been doing for the last 6 months? We've all been saying it's time to get moving, time to start training up on this stuff. So no excuses. You probably want to come up with some standards, and look, don't go overboard with this stuff. Come up with a naming standard that works for you. I've got a really simple one. It's object dash, what does it do? So it's account, update contacts. It's account, update last activity date. Pretty obvious what it does. Account, update shipping address. Wonder what that does, right? That's my naming standard. That's as complicated as I get. Really simple. The nice thing about it is all the ones that are related to account are sorted together. So that makes life easy. If I'm looking to see what's on the account, what automations are there, they're all sorted together when I look at a list of flows. Settle on some variables and constant and formula names. But again, if you have to write it down and you have to train people on how it works, then my thought is you've got it wrong. It should be obvious. It should be simple. Do some documentation inside the flow. Everywhere you go in flow, you're creating a new variable, you're creating a new screen. There's a spot where you can put a sentence or two of text. Do it. And if need be, for the more complex flows, create some external documentation so the next person comes along, has got a better idea of how you did it. Okay, so this question's come up a lot. Is it one flow per object, or is it one flow for create, one for update, one for delete? Well, it depends. At first, when the developers were trying to tell us Flownatics how to do it, they said, oh, no, you've got to have one flow per object, because that's how we do it in Apex when we create a trigger. We create a trigger handler, and then, yeah, but we only have one per object. And we thought, oh, okay. And then we pretty quickly found out, well, yeah, that doesn't really work. Because we've got these workflows and we're creating them in flow, and we got 10 of them, and we can't bunch them all together. So that's really not going to work. So then they started talking, well, maybe we should just have one for create off each object, and one for update off each object, and one for delete. And yeah, that's kind of gone out of favor at the moment. So the bottom line is, it does depend very much on how complex your org is. Where possible, combine them into one flow. Okay, and you can now use the formula editor in flow in the start element to put a lot of that logic that's going to decide whether or not your flow needs to run right up front before it even starts. Okay, so you don't want to have to run the flow every time a record's updated to then get to a decision element to decide, oh, is it the right record type? Oh, no, okay, we'll stop. So you've loaded a flow and you've wasted a whole cycle through the flow to get to the point where, well, we didn't even need to run it anyway. So now you can do that in the start element by using that new formula function. So yeah, where possible, combine them into one if you can. If you end up with multiple flows still, just use the Trigger Explorer and set the execution order so that you don't have one flow updating something which causes something else to update and causes something else to update. And of course, don't have a mix of workflows and flows and process builders all on the one object, and Apex triggers. Work out how you're going to test your flows, because you're going to move from a working workflow to now you've got a flow. So how are you going to test that? So you've got unit testing where you build your flow, your developer or your admin who builds the flow tests it on its own. Does it work? Yes, good. Results right? Yes, okay. And then maybe you move it into another sandbox where you do some integration testing with other automations and more records and stuff like that. So that's your integration testing. And don't forget, of course, Flow now supports tests, and you can even write Apex test classes, I believe. Never done it. What about using conversion tools? So Salesforce are coming out, and unofficial SF have already got conversion tools to convert workflows and process builders to Flow. Great. That sounds great. Is it? Well, you can quickly move a whole bunch of automations to Flow. So that's kind of good. But the against. If you don't analyze them, identify which ones are still being used, combine them, take advantage of the new features of Flow, then all you've done is taken 20 workflows, picked them up, and put them into Flow. So now you've got 20 flows running on the same object. You've achieved nothing. It's a bit like your mother telling you to clean your room, and you just go and pick up all your junk and put it in your sister's room. You've achieved absolutely nothing. So don't use the conversion tools, is my recommendation. Do it properly. Don't believe me? Well, you go and try them. Try them out. Questions? Have I convinced you? Who thinks they still need to use the conversion tools? Anybody want to argue why they should? Anybody want to put a question or a comment in the chat before we run the raffle? We've got 3 minutes. Okay, while you're thinking of your questions, if you want some more details, I wrote quite a lengthy 5-part series. This is pretty much a summary of it this session. But if you want some more detail, if you go to blog.certifycrm.com, you have to go back a bit to October and you'll find there's a 5-part series on transitioning to flow. And I expand on each one of these items in quite a bit more detail. Excuse me. If you're interested in learning